Hi everybody, we are on the air. Steve, you're welcome. And you're welcome everybody.
Thank you, Svetlana. My name is Steve Harrington. I'm on the banks of the St. Croix River in Minnesota, and I'd like to introduce several people here. To my immediate left is Svetlana, who is our host today. She's in the Kiev. Next to her is Sergey. He's in Poland. Next to him is Jim Addington, who is in Seattle, Washington, right? Next to James is Lauren Waybright, who is in Brooklyn, New York. And next to Lauren is Seva Gandhi, who is in Chicago. So welcome everybody. And what we'd like to do is just have a short conversation with some fresh questions and some as well, I hope. So what we want to talk about today is a program that the Institute of Cultural Affairs did over a several-year period of time. It has several ways to talk about it, several names perhaps. Service Learning Program is a common way to talk about it because that word stresses the idea of learning. Now, there was a very detailed program that went on with this, but the part that we want to focus on today is not the program content as much as we would like to hear from two of the people who really helped create and craft and coach folks, work with coach, guide the program, are James Addington and Seva Gandhi. And so I'd like to just ask a couple of simple questions and see if we might create a little understanding about the stuff, the behind the scenes, the kind of, maybe an old-fashioned word is pedagogy, some of the learning assumptions, some of the learning events that occurred and got created. So one of the first things that I ever saw personally in this program was a design lab where Seva and James were engaged in trying to understand what were the human capacities that they wanted to make sure got front and center in the learning that was going on in this program. So it sort of prompts my first question, which is very at the beginning of the program. I think the first real event was a program with students at Oklahoma City University in Chicago. What was your intention?
Sure, I can provide sort of the bigger picture, and then James, maybe if you want to talk about what we actually wanted out of the student learning. But I would say that why ICA USA got re-engaged in sort of university work and working with university students is 2012 marked our 50th anniversary, and what we said is we wanted to look 50 years into the future, not 50 years into the past. And because ICA started off a lot with college student engagement, and that was sort of the blood of the organization for so long, we thought we should probably re-engage in that space. And so with that in mind, Terry, the executive director, sort of got James and I together and a few other folks and said, what would it mean to re-engage college students, and what is it that we have to offer college students? And so I'd say that's sort of why we started doing the program, and then James could talk about the components that we sort of decided the program should have.
Yeah, I think for me the kind of background design that was pretty fundamental to our sense of what we wanted to accomplish was a threefold design. You can almost imagine them as three interlinking circles. Relevant contextual curriculum and purposeful social civic engagement, and then intentional learning community. And our sense was that we wanted the emphasis in terms of time to be on the civic engagement. And so for every hour that the students spent in doing more traditional curriculum work, they would spend at least 2 hours, sometimes 3, in civic engagement. And then all of this happened in the context of intentional community. Pedagogically, we were clear that we wanted a program that was student-centered rather than content-centered, and that we wanted to strengthen the capacity of students to do action research. One of the screens that we were interested in them experiencing the city of Chicago through is the screen of asset-based community development. We were going to send them out into Chicago neighborhoods, and we wanted them to be clear that they were looking for the assets of those communities as opposed to identifying what the communities were lacking.
Well, let me see if I could take off on that. And I actually did meet a couple of these student interns, and I think altogether there may have been about 200 in the program. I'm not sure what the exact number is. Here for a moment.
So we have been experimenting with a lot of different things. I think the one you're specifically talking to right now is the summer of 2012. And what I can say is a notable person is now on ICA staff. We had over 40 students that were engaged that summer, and as James talked about, we had sort of the 3 overlapping circles, and we focused also on methods training as well, on sort of ICA's methodology, journaling and reflection and things like that. And one of the students, Caitlin, at the time, the way that we had set up the teams is that we had a leadership team that managed of 10 students that managed sort of the rest of the students for this summer. So that we had a 3-week program with 10 students and then a 10-week program with all 40 students. And so it was very sort of student-led, student-driven, and they kind of really participated in the decision-making process. And Caitlin was on one of the teams, and she was just so eager to participate in the project. She ended up somehow on all 3 of the teams. She was going out in the community, then she was also helping with event design, she was helping with promotion, and she was very eager to sort of stay on after the internship ended. She continued on with the ICA as a volunteer for a while. She came in even though she was still in school, and then at the end of sort of 4 months, she applied for Public Allies, which is an AmeriCorps program. So ICA then also applied for AmeriCorps program, and then she was with us for yet another year. And just last month, we hired her on as a full-time staff. So I would say that's memorable in terms of is really a way to get a lot more people engaged in the ICA who are very committed to what it is that we're about.
And James, in the course of your meeting and working with all those folks, any memorable characters you care to bring to mind?
Well, actually, I think Caitlin's probably the one that I would have said something about as well. So why don't we leave it with Caitlin?
Okay, good. Well,
so that we can talk about the process.
Sure. Maybe another way to come at it would be, it seemed to me that one of the things that happened on the Fridays in at least the summer program was a presentation where the student teams really presented kind of what they were up to, what they'd accomplished at the end of the week. So could you just characterize what it might have been like for a team doing a week in the life of one of these learning communities that you created?
Well, what the teams reported on Friday, of course, was the results of their week of action research. And their assignment in their research was to scour the neighborhoods of the city of Chicago, all 77 community areas, looking for local neighborhood level initiatives that were contributing to the sustainability of communities across Chicago. So we were frankly convinced that there was a lot going on in the city of Chicago that was under the radar, that was making Chicago in general a more sustainable city, and in particular was contributing to the health and the resilience of local communities. And so their research assignment was to go out into neighborhoods using a variety of tools and research methodologies and see what they could find.
What I can note about it is, in the best of ICA traditions, we kind of let people have their own autonomy and decide what it is that they wanted their presentations to look like, what it is that they wanted their action research to look like. We said, here's a task, now you figure out how you want to do the task. I would say that's very difficult for a lot of students because that is not the way that our traditional education system works here in the States. It's you're told not only what to do, but how you go about doing it. And there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And so I would say there was a lot of difficulty on the front end of students requiring more structure, requiring more answers. And we would always push back and say, this is the setup this way by design, not default. It's not that we didn't think about how you could go about doing this, but we wanted you to use your own creativity to come up with the best ways you could do it. And so it was, I would say, as time went on throughout the 10 weeks, at the earlier end on the Fridays, people had more difficulty, and by the end, they had come up with their own system, and the community of students came up with what they thought was most effective and efficient. And it was something that was a struggle, but I think they really came to appreciate by the end of it.
So one way to think about that pedagogically is that we were interested in a participative pedagogy that used an action reflection process where students literally created the knowledge base.
The thing that as I listen to you talk, that I become curious about, actually more curious about, is how you thought about your own role. My sister, for a long time, was a dancer, and later she became a choreographer of other dancers, and she seemed to know things about making dance happen that people came to listen to her and work with her, and in the course of things, some wonderful things got created. I don't know if you guys would consider yourself choreographers exactly, but just trying to find a way to invite you to talk a little bit about the experience of being someone that is a guide or a choreographer, if you will, of this kind of activity.
James, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go?
Go ahead.
I think that a lot of what we call ourselves at ICA is facilitators, and I think that a lot of time, especially in student learning, people tend to go for training, and we're very, very clear on when we use that word versus facilitating. And I think that we were facilitating student learning, and we were facilitating students being able to decide what it is that they thought was important and then sort of see that through. And so was your question, Steve, what that process was like, or if that was difficult, or what is your question, I guess?
Well, just more like what your experience was like of, trying to be, front and center and resourceful when needed, but maybe not exactly, the sage on the stage probably isn't the role that you had most days. What was it like to try to guide this program?
I would say from my experience, I had to do a lot of pushing back because, again, people would always come looking for answers. And so it had to really be in the forefront of my imagination that I wasn't, and things that seemed simple that probably I did have an answer of a way it could go, to be really mindful of the fact that that wasn't sort of the part of the process that we were trying to choose. I would say that in terms of staffing-wise, it was more difficult for some folks. We had a lot of different people on the team, not just James and I do think that people who are problem solvers or tend to, when confronted with a question, want to give an answer. And so internally as our team, I think we kept discussing, we can't give these students answers. We have to keep sort of probing them with the questions and let them figure it out on their own. Otherwise, it's not going to be a student-led initiative. And I think that it was, when you tend to be a solutions-oriented person, it's a little difficult to continually keep that in the back of your mind.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. James?
Yes, so remembering that part of our sort of background design had to do with exposing them to what seemed to us to be a relevant contextual curriculum. And so this role of facilitator, coach, and guide meant that you had to hop back and forth between doing a number of different things, one of which was, on occasion, sharing intellectual frameworks that then would become a conceptual tool for them. That in terms of the pushback that Seva mentioned, you know, we could push them back on the frameworks that we had engaged them, you know, in learning. And so, you know, that was their context for creating their own solutions to their quandaries.
You got a quandary in mind when you say that? It'd be nice to have a simple little example.
When, let's say, you know, a part of the team was to go out and find community assets, and, you know, we gave general ways in which you might start to do that, which is through internet research, by doing community canvassing, you know, and by talking to people. And some people would come back and say, you know, I've been through this community and there's just nothing there. And that was not an acceptable answer for us. And we'd say, okay, well, what is it that you haven't thought of? And what is it, you know, when we looked at what we did the training on asset-based community development, what are some tools you can use? Like, is there a public library in that space? Is there, you know, and how does snowballing work? And we taught very sort of basic community organizing skills. And in terms of the pushback, it would not be accepting that this is just not happening as an answer. It would be more like, you have the skill set to keep going deeper until you find what it is that you're looking for. And I think that also took a lot of understanding and faith on our part that there is actually a lot of great stuff happening in the city.
Yes, yes, right.
Well, I guess my last question, really, my experience of that program, the little bit that I saw it, it just seemed so intensely engaged with the city of Chicago, and so profoundly wound up in getting connections built and understanding the kinds of things that you've been talking about. I'm wondering if, as guides to that program, if you saw some things that might be transferable out of that Chicago context into a different culture, into a different learning environment, into a different institutional framework, that might be some clues if you're going to adapt something, project-based inquiry or asset-based community development, or this particular style of learning. What would be some things that you would recommend that people look into if they were going to try to design a program that has some of these qualities in a completely different cultural or organizational context?
You know, that's a challenging question, and I think for me that one of the things that we felt very strongly about was the threefold design of the program. That somehow you've got to deal with relevant contextual curriculum, purposeful civic engagement, and intentional learning community, and weave those three together. Now, I think that's the framework that would be transferable in virtually any cultural context. And then related to that, the pedagogical assumptions, which in some ways may be more challenging, but the business of participative pedagogy that's student-centered learning and uses an action reflection process is pretty fundamental to making it work.
Well, maybe that's a place to begin to bring our conversation to a close. Is there anything that you wished I would have asked, or I shoulda, coulda, woulda asked, that you were hoping to say that I didn't ask, that you want to put in at this point, or do you feel like we've at least got a start to this inquiry that we want to do? Any other thing that you have that you'd like to put in?
I mean, I guess maybe a question that I, not shoulda, coulda, woulda, but a lessons learned and sort of where we went from there. I would have been happy to answer that, because that was now 2 years ago, and we've done several things with a lot of student groups since.
Okay, so go ahead. What's a lesson learned?
So, you know, I think one of the big pieces of feedback that we got, and I think this is very true to ICA, is that we have this amazing skill set of being able to be facilitators and of being able to engage folks, and we don't necessarily always do the best job of translating that skill set. We use it, but we don't then always share that with other people on how they could use it. And so a lot of the students were really interested in methods. They're like, I know what you just did there, and I know that you got everyone to participate, but I don't know how you did that. Mm-hmm. And so sort of from there, we have been trying to infuse more methods into, we'll do the training, or we'll do something with the students, and then we'll pull back the curtain. So this summer we had students where we did similar things to what we've done previously, but then we'd stop and we'd say, okay, now what did we just do there? And what was the learning there? And how might you apply this to community groups that you've worked with? And we're sort of making a shift of engaging students who are really interested in community development as a career choice and a career path. And, a lot of times in school you learn how, theory-wise, how, communities need to have ownership over what it is that they're doing. Communities need to feel this way. You need to do this. You need to do that. But you don't learn any practical tools or skill sets to do that. And what ICA has to offer is it goes very well with that traditional education of, theory. We have sort of the practical pieces and the tie-in to it. And so for me, that was a major lesson learned of students really want this, and they want to be able to take the theory that they've learned and apply it. We have the application tools, and I think we are trying, when we engage with students, to get that more present.
And you called that pushing back the curtain, was that or something like that?
Oh, the pulling back the curtain. It's just, if you do something, then you take a minute and stop and say, what did we just do? And then sort of deconstruct it. Mm-hmm.
Got it. James, any thoughts that you want to add before we stop?
Just a reflection on the civic engagement. Because these students were doing research in local neighborhoods, one of the things that we believed at the beginning, and that I think we learned was especially important, was that the research be done in a way that's accountable to the communities that the students touch, so that folks know what's going to happen to the information students gather, and that you have a way of reconnecting with the communities and sharing with them the results of the practical research the students were involved in. And so the notion of accountability, particularly in dealing with local communities, is so fundamental. And I think that, for me, our work sort of underscored that.
And the accountability that you're referring to specifically is the sort of the local arena of engagement, like the local community?
Accountability to the neighborhoods and communities the students were involved in.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. Well, I really want to thank you guys for taking the time. I have acquired really some profound respect for your own leadership skills. Privileged to listen to you and work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seva.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.